So let's turn to our guest, Matt Towery of Insider Advantage, joining us from Atlanta. How does Ebola figure in this North Carolina Senate race?
Well, it's interesting. Last week it figured in fairly substantially because Kay Hagan had sort of taken the approach that the border should not be closed and more of a hands-off approach. And suddenly she whipsawed around and said that she believed that, in fact, we should end travel with the affected countries for the time being. Now, Ebola was big last week. We're going to see if it's big this week because we have the hospital in Dallas now saying that many of the individuals who had contact with patient zero, as they call it, the gentleman who passed away, are past the time period of incubation and they are free to roam the countryside. But we also have the World Health Organization suggesting that the incubation period is more like 45 days. So we may have a lull in Ebola. If we have other cases come up, this whole thing is going to come up again. You know how news cycles are, JD. One week you're hot, the next week you're not.
Well, it is worth noting attitudinally, whether or not Ebola remains a public health scare, the reaction of the government is weighing in on this. Politico, with a new poll out, dealing with that question, how is the government dealing with the possible spread of Ebola? That poll showing that only 22% of likely voters have a lot of confidence the government is doing everything it can when it comes to Ebola. 12% have no confidence at all. Now, you take that no confidence, you take a look at motivated voters in a midterm, it would seem to augur well for conservatives, or is this just basically the libertarian argument that takes root right there in a race, either in North Carolina or Georgia or elsewhere?
Well, I looked at that poll as well, the Politico poll, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think when you add the two groups up that were most concerned or dissatisfied with the response, it was under 50%. So while it's a substantial reaction to it, it's not an overwhelming reaction. What I think is really happening, JD, and we saw it last week, is the president has appeared to many Americans to be just off the reservation. You don't see him holding many news conferences. He's somewhat quiet about what approach he's going to take to Ebola. He's been quiet with regard to ISIS. The president has not looked like he's in control. But his numbers, I always look at that Gallup approval rating, it still stays in the low 40 percentile range. In other words, he doesn't have very far to go up or go down. But the slightest decrease in his popularity at the end of this whole thing, at the end of October, could literally take those Democratic candidates down below where they need to be in order to win.
Fair enough. Now, Matt, there's something else going on, too, we need to talk about. New York Times with an article today talking about the gender gap that Kay Hagan has it made, that Tom Tillis is a tailor-designed candidate to challenge over the gender gap. I saw a lot of those ads this last week when I was in North Carolina. Is that going to work in the final analysis for Kay Hagan?
Well, that's her big ace in the hole, or big card that she has going, is to try to play the gender gap and also try to move young people to vote. I want to add this very quickly, JD. When you look at these polls, these last polls you're going to see it in states like North Carolina, it's a big issue as to what percentage the pollsters give to the 18 to 29-year-old crowd. If they are overstating that number, then that means the Democrats look stronger than they are. But if younger voters and female voters turn out in a large enough number, then Kay Hagan get a pass again, and she could be reelected.
So it has to do with turnout. Fair enough. It also has to do with money, or the lack thereof. You said something in the earlier segment. Got a little more than a minute left. Want to talk about money in this North Carolina race. A lot of folks say this will be the most expensive Senate race in the country. Do you believe that? And is the money pouring in from Hollywood for Hagan?
Well, the answer is yes and yes. It will be the most expensive, which you would never have guessed North Carolina would end up being that way. Secondly, even though the Koch brothers put in a lot of money this last week or so for Tillis, it still won't be enough to equal what Kay Hagan's getting from folks on the West Coast and other places around the country. The National Democratic Party has done a better job of mobilizing money and mobilizing their than the Republicans have. We talked about this before, JD. If the Republicans can't do it this time, it's going to make it really tough in the presidential election just 2 years from now.
Well, we'll see what happens there, and we will keep our eye on these two races, North Carolina and Georgia. As always, Matt Towery, we thank you for your insights and analysis, and we will talk again quite soon. Fair enough.
Thank you, JD.
Thank you very much, Matt. So you heard what Matt has to say. What is your take on this? Why don't you tweet me your comments at Newsmax TV, hashtag Americas Forum. You can also visit us at newsmaxtv.com/comment. And we don't often lavish attention on our Facebook page and that mechanism, but it is there for you. And you get to us at facebook.com/Newsmax. So that's how you can get a hold of us. Still to come this hour, we will see Left versus Right, Rick Unger and Javier Manjarres with a panel on politics. There's also more ahead, so stay with us.